All right, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the world, wherever you are. My name is Dr. Anindya Bhattacharjee. I'm from Oxford University, and I'm very pleased to moderate this session on stakeholder voices for transforming leadership and management education. There is a trust deficit which is existing in organizations and businesses. I think this is something which even our Prime Chair, Professor Tima Bansal, reiterated during her talk. In the morning, we had a session on leadership, and there is a crisis of leadership that exists. But there are certain questions which we need to ask and we need to address. For example, is leader the only one who is at fault? Or is it the sole responsibility of the leader to create a culture where people will feel safe and they can speak and they can express and they can share their ideas? All of these we will discuss in due course of this session. We are extremely pleased to have a panel of distinguished experts to speak on the topic of stakeholder voices. We have Professor Wim van de Kerkhoff from EdHec Business School. I hope, Wim, I have been able to pronunciate your last name correctly.
Yeah, it was super. Thanks, Anindya.
We have Professor Anthony Montgomery, who is a professor of occupational and organizational psychology at Northumbria University in UK. And we are also joined by Professor Silvia Rolfer from the CUNEF University in Madrid, Spain. I would like to start first with the presentation by Professor Anthony. He's going to speak on why are organizational cover-ups so common. I think that is where we ended in our previous session in Eastern Hemisphere, when we talked a lot about leadership crisis. We will continue from there, but then we will proceed what is the role of employee voice. So over to you, Professor Anthony.
Hello, Anindya. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'll just stick up my slides. Are the slides okay? Yeah.
Yes, we can see your slides. Yeah.
Okay. So as I've been instructed, I'm going to keep this to 15 minutes. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about why our organizational cover-up is so common. So this is a topic I'm kind of writing a book on at the moment. So for me, this is a great opportunity just to get some feedback on some of the ideas that I'm putting into the book. In terms of the talk, over the 15 minutes, I'm just going to talk a little bit about history, purpose of organizations, and the role of organizational psychology within this. And I think before I start, I just flag, I think the history one is really interesting. I think psychology in general, we don't really make enough use of the tools and research in history, especially in my field, organizational psychology. It's a field which is underrepresented, but it's one which is incredibly useful when we're talking about things like cover-ups in organizations. So the place I'm going to start is with something that was quite recent, but it was very recent to the UK. It was a post office saga in the UK. It was known as the Horizon Post Office scandal. And for people not from the UK, in a nutshell, what had happened was the post office had started to use an IT system developed by Fujitsu, and it was the system was called Horizon, and it had many different bugs in the system, which was causing many problems for all their sub-postmasters. And this problem became so serious that individuals were being charged with crimes, and in some cases, some individuals even committed suicide because they were under the impression that they owed money to the post office. But what actually transpired after many years of campaigning is that it was the post office and their system were at fault. And this has just recently come into the media now and come to the attention of everybody because, you know, they've had they've started to have investigations about it. They started to have committees about it in the UK. But the UK Post Office, it sort of joins a long list of cover-ups and scandals. It includes, you might be familiar with some of them, Hillsborough, which happened in the UK, Enron in America, Grenfell in the UK as well, the infected blood scandal, which is actually a big issue now in the UK. And in Ireland, we have the Tuam baby scandal. And we also have American examples like Boeing 737 MAX and NASA with their Columbia shuttle. And these are just examples mainly from the UK and from Ireland and some from America. But I'm sure in your own countries in which you live, you can find many examples yourself. So what really brought this to the fore, ironically, was that a movie was made about the UK Horizon post office scandal. And even though this was, this was going on, it was public information, people were writing about it in the newspaper, like in The Guardian. It wasn't until the TV dramatization that the public really became very interested. And there was huge outrage and disbelief that something like this could have happened. But I became interested as an organizational psychologist from the perspective that this, for me, was just another example in a long list of dysfunctional organizational behavior. And so it was kind of, for me, it was more expected rather than exceptional. So from my perspective, that's the part I became sort of interested in. So I suppose one of the arguments I'm making in this book is that the corporate drive to hide the truth is not random, but I would say inevitable, actually, which I think is very important. I think we don't have enough time to talk about it in 15 minutes, but I think for me, there's an inevitability about these scandals. And of course, we're only focusing on the ones which reach the media. I mean, you can imagine how many other things are happening in organizations which don't get the same kind of media coverage. So I suppose as an organizational psychologist, I'm really, well, listen, why does this happen? And why is it likely to keep on happening? Which is kind of the interesting topic. Well, just to kind of go back in history a little bit. So a lot of our approaches now to organizational science and a lot of our approaches to business have been very heavily influenced by things like Taylorism, to name just one. And Taylorism really stands out as being one of the most influential. And this is a still from a very famous movie from Charlie Chaplin called Modern Times. It was released in 1936. And what the movie did is it skewered, scientific management movements like Taylor's. I mean, some of you will be familiar, like with Deming, and Fordism. So all these kind of movements, which the idea was they were trying to suggest that, people were just kind of cogs in the machine. And it was very much driven by this idea that, work needs to be analyzed scientifically to optimize efficiency. But the interesting question here is, within this framework of organizing work, where do we place people? Where do people fit in this particular scenario? So if Taylorism fed directly into the treatment of, factory workers as elements in the workplaces that needs to be monitored and controlled. So in this sense, there was a real sense in which individuals were almost seen as, sort of a problem, if you like, or something that needed to be, taken care of, controlled, and to be made more efficient, to be treated more machine-like, which was the point of Modern Times. And to be fair to Chaplin, who's not a philosopher or a psychologist, but I think if we look at his movie, I think Chaplin understood that the machine metaphor was more than just better technology. It was a kind of template for how people ought to behave. So a lot of what's going on in terms of organizational cover-up has its roots in how leaders are ought to behave, how we're meant to behave, how the public are meant to behave. So the ought to behave is a big element of this kind of cover-up culture. Now, one of the things that happens a lot of the time when scandals do happen, and I've just put up the picture there of the ex-post office box, Paula Venables, is that stories about scandals, they vilify the people involved. And I think that tells a very important story. I mean, individuals obviously carry some responsibility, but blaming leaders is easier than accepting that institutions and governments are culpable. So the public, and this, I suppose, what underlies this is the idea of trying to make sense of something. And this is very much, for people who are interested in sense making and the work of Carl Weick, you can see that in terms of trying to make sense of something as terrible, in inverted commas, as a scandal, you need to find somewhere to place that blame. And what you notice in all scandals is that there's a sort of a propensity to locate the blame with the leaders because it's easy, because it's it tells a good story. But of course, it sort of ignores the most important question, which is, how did this person, get to that particular position? What were the, why did the environment support the leader to take the decisions they had taken, which were ones which ended up in some form of scandal? And what you also find in these situations, and this is very, very true of all the corporate scandals I've been reading and analyzing, is that a big part of it is controlling the narrative. Yeah. So in these scandals, the institutions and corporations, they skillfully control the narrative until the bubble of lies or incomplete accounts burst. And the absence of convictions or meaningful repercussions, which is also another characteristic of all the scandals I've read about, following almost scandals, is abysmal. And as you can imagine, as a learning outcome, as a real learning outcome, this is very important, because what this also says is it says that even if these things do happen, there's not going to be real repercussions. Of course, the public are going to be dismayed. Of course, there's going to be lots of reports. But there's also this very unfortunate learning curve about, even when these things are pushed and there's whistleblowers and they get to a certain point, the lack of any meaningful repercussions, I think, sends a very strong message that is going to make these things even more likely, because people understand that they're going to be protected largely by organizations, and they're going to be protected by the systems, which themselves don't want to be examined in these situations. Now, you might say to yourself, a lot of the time, especially in business schools, we have this idea that we can educate people, and we can try to develop, and we can try to create better leaders who are more responsible, who are more sustainable. I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, we can't depend on leaders to do the right thing if we keep educating to put them their mission first and people second. And that's something that I've seen a lot, not just in organizations with scandals, but organizations which don't have scandals, who I happen to work with. I mean, the idea that the mission always comes first and people second. The people are there. We have to look after people, but you can see the mission is generally always first. And, if we're being very honest, we tend to promote and hire on the basis that leaders put organizations first. And I think that's true of nearly every organization I've worked for, every organization I've consulted with and collaborated with. I mean, it's very unusual not to find that, which for me is another reason why these things are likely going to keep on happening. And I don't want to, I want to also put my own field under the spotlight, which is organizational psychology. I mean, we're also a big part of the problem, in a sense. I mean, there's, Aguinas et al., if you look at some of their research, they've noted the fact that there's a movement of organizational psychologists away from psychology departments to business schools, which I think is not a very healthy movement. But you can see that organizational psychology is something now that's becoming more the servant of business than it is in the kind of the department in psychology, where it's more likely, at least, that ethical considerations are going to be talked about. We've many, also in terms of, the literature, which is becoming more and more prevalent, it's becoming more technical and it's becoming less meaningful, which has kind of been noted by other researchers, not just me. I just wanted to pick these two out because I think they tell a very important story, and they're very much, they link to what the point I'm making about the way that kind of business schools are going, or the way that Taylorism has influenced. I mean, in 1974, Peter Drucker, I've never met Peter Drucker, I've never talked to him, who was a very popular writer on management, said, Taylor was the first man in recorded history who deemed work deserving a systematic observation study. Well, of course, that's not true. I mean, any knowledge of history will tell you that's completely incorrect. So I don't know why Taylor wrote that, because it's very easy to demolish that as a fact. And obviously, if we look at what has happened in the history of business education, there's a great book from 2010 called From Higher Aims to Hired Hands, and I think he clinically and forensically charts the way in which we risk, business people, consultants, organizational psychologists, we just risk becoming the servants of industry, basically. And to kind of add into that, then we have this other problem where you know, we have large amounts of data now, and everything's become online. And I really like this paper by Anderson in 2009 when he talks about the M-Turkification. Is the kind of M-Turk is a very common way to collect data in the US, for example. And he talks about the fact that actually some of the people who, you know, a lot of our theories depend on, they basically wouldn't get jobs now, or they basically wouldn't be, you know, they wouldn't be valorized in this particular environment. And so in that sense, the way in which we do collect research and do research in business and management and organizational psychology, it is changing, and it's changed very considerably. And I think, you know, I was trying to, there's so many examples, but for me, the worst and the best example is this one. And it's, you know, I think it's ironic that I think the person who wrote best about this wasn't a psychologist, but a journalist, Francis Wheen. So Francis Wheen has a very nice book called How Mumbo Jumbo Conquered the World. And he tells a story. Sorry, just get a little water here. He tells a story about how in 1988, Edward de Bono, and again, I don't know de Bono, so he said that, you know, he was talking to the UK Department of Education, and he presented this 6 hats thinking system, which he described as the first new way of thinking developed since Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, that's so over the top, it's unbelievable. And I think, you know, Wheen in his book, he really lampoons clinically the way in which kind of management fads and this guru culture have really done a disservice to the study of business, the study of education, and the study of kind of psychology. One of the, I mean, for anybody who's interested in the history of psychology, one of the kind of more interesting voices in this field is a psychologist called Kurt Danziger, who doesn't write a lot about business or leadership, writes a lot about the history of psychology. But Danziger makes this very nice point, which I think is very apt. He talks about how, you know, we're ignoring reality, that ultimately we're not really making knowledge, we're making knowledge views. And that these knowledge views we produce as social scientists, they need to be verified. And also, these views are shaped by what we think the recipients of the knowledge want. So Danziger, I think, gets us to think about the fact that, you know, and this has become an even bigger problem these days, that we are producing knowledge in a way to serve the interest of industry. We're not being really as honest as we could be about the epistemological and ontological nature of our knowledge. We just are servicing an industry because, you know, we need to get funding, we need to get more money, we need to get things published, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a nice point by Danziger. So the UK Post Office scandal is a reminder of what happens when methods are championed over dysfunctional systems. The initial defense of the IT system reflected the belief that technology can't be wrong. And it should remind us that technology is a tool designed by humans who are often wrong. And I've kind of, for those who are interested, just put a link there. I've written a lot about this in the British Psychologist magazine. I talk about measurement, meaning, and myth. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the problems. Are there any solutions? Well, the only solution I've seen, which to me has a strong probability of actually having some effect, is one known as the Hillsborough Law, which was kind of produced it came out of the Hillsborough tragedy. And it's the idea of introducing a legally enforceable duty of candor for police and public authorities investigations, and equal legal funding for bereaved families and inquiries and inquests, which, let's be honest, would go some way to ending the David versus Goliath journey. So one of the big problems is that, as I said, the people who are perpetrating the scandals are controlling the narrative, and they also control all the resources. Failure, I haven't had a lot of time to talk today about failure, but failure is a big issue, which, you know, I think organizations don't want to talk about failures, and they certainly don't seem to want to learn from them. And I think if you want an example of that, if you either look at the Columbia Space Shuttle tragedy or the 737 Boeing Max, you can see they really, not only, even when they are forced to admit failure, they really don't want to learn from these experiences. Similarly, employee silence is quite common. Whistleblowing is rare. So I think the DNA of business and education has a particular flaw, which is that ethics and social justice are very much seen as peripheral issues, as add-ons. Okay, I'm near the finish now. I'm just watching the time, so don't go over my 15 minutes. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm asking how we can move forward. In terms of my book, I'm trying to also not just look at the negative, I'm trying to look at the positive. Now, I just put it, this is something I put on LinkedIn and all other social forums about 6 months ago. And what's interesting for me is that nobody has responded to this. I mean, I'm the type of person who publishes a lot on social media. People are always responding. They agree, they disagree. This is the only time I've put a question in social media and it's been blank, zero. Nobody has anything to say about this particular topic, which I find interesting. Okay, that's just me. If obviously I've only had 15 minutes, a lot of the topics I talked about today, you can find them. I read an article about it for the British Conversation. I just thought I'd also plug the fact that I'm looking for two PhD projects. So if there's anybody in the audience who wants to do a PhD, I'm looking to do a PhD, one about emotional labor, the other about burnout and early career researchers. And also there's my contact details. Okay, Anindo, I hope I haven't, I hope I've kept within my time. Maybe I've gone a minute or two over. I apologize if I have.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, Anthony. I guess you have set the tone quite right. And we really need to look into how do we educate people to speak up. And that's very, very essential because as you said, that employee silence is common and whistleblowing is rare. So I think we should come to Wim now and hear him as to how can we teach students about whistleblowing. And so over to you, Wim.
Thank you very much, and that's a wonderful transition from Anthony's talk to mine. That's really impressive. Let me just put up my slides. Okay. Because yeah, indeed, you know, what I wanted to talk about was a better way to teach whistleblowing to business students. Now, whistleblowing has always been one of the key issues within business ethics. So, if in a business school or a management program, there is a business ethics course or a CSR or an SDG course, and it's quite possible that one of the issues mentioned there will be whistleblowing, and I've certainly have been teaching it for many years, but I've changed my tack in how I actually teach it. So my main point is, I mean, the thing I'm going to be attacking might be a straw man kind of argument, but my point in what I want to bring is really that when we teach about whistleblowing, we should try to make it as close to reality of how whistleblowing actually evolves. And so it needs to be a little bit research-based. That's my main point. So very briefly, here's a standard definition of whistleblowing. It's a disclosure by organizational members of illegal, illegitimate, or unethical practices. So they're disclosing wrongdoing, which is under the control of their employer, and they're disclosing that to someone who can affect action. They don't have the mandate or power to stop the wrongdoing themselves, and that's why they raise a concern, they call upon someone else to stop that wrongdoing. That could be internal, it could also be external. I think it relates to SDG 8, that's the main thing we're talking about in this webinar. I think it's also related to SDG 16, of course, peace and justice at all levels. I think this whistleblowing would be one of those connects. But within SDG 8, I like to say it's target 8 within that, which is protect labor rights, promote safe and secure working environments for all workers. It has something about precarious employment as well, and it's something that whistleblowers notice too often, that when they do raise a concern, all of a sudden they realize their employment is actually very precarious. But making workplaces safe and secure, ensuring psychological safety, ensuring discussability is very, very much part of that. Okay, so the structure of my talk is first how not to teach whistleblowing. And as I say, that might be a straw man that I'm drawing, but fair enough. Maybe it's not. Then I'll tell you give 4 reasons why that is not such a good approach to teach whistleblowing. And then I'm going to suggest a better way and even make some suggestion on how you could run that class. Okay. So how not to teach it, but it is possible. People do it this way. I certainly started out like that, but as I said, over the years, I've changed tack. So a lot of people, you might start out with presenting some well-known, heavily mediatized and high-profile cases, like the three people I've put that picture there. And I think, out of the people watching here, it's very, very likely that you don't recognize anyone. If you recognize one, it's probably Francis Hogan, the person on the right here, the Facebook whistleblower. But who recognizes Peter Zatko, who is the Twitter whistleblower? And the person in the middle is Ifeoma Ozoma, the Pinterest whistleblower. These are high-profile cases. They've been heavily mediatized, and they are well known if you're into this topic. But if you start with that, your students will go like, "No, haven't heard of them." So that's a kind of like, don't do that. Or you might present students with a case vignette, and of course that's part of it. But describing a situation as you see here. A situation in which a professional witnesses wrongdoing. And I got this little vignette. I just asked Copilot, so a generative AI. I said, give me a whistleblowing case that I could use to teach it to business students. And this is what it showed me. It said, Dr. Adams, a senior scientist at XYZ Corporation, discovered irregularities in the clinical trial data. She noticed that adverse effects were downplayed and the drug's efficacy was exaggerated, and she suspected that the company was prioritizing profits over patient safety. She faced a difficult decision. Should she blow the whistle on the unethical practices? Simple vignette. I would say this is not a good way, or this is not the best way to teach business, to teach whistleblowing to business students. And I'll give you 4 reasons why. Let's call this vignette now the bad vignette, okay, in what comes. So why is this a bad vignette? Well, the first reason is because whistleblowing is a protracted process. In the bad vignette, it seems like it's a one-off decision that you could take at the distance, rational decision. Reality is very different. Whistleblowing, I did research with Aaron Phillips. We published in 2019. We analyzed the more than 800 cases of whistleblowing, and we traced the first 4 times people tried to raise a concern. And so the whistleblowing actually starts when no one is thinking of whistleblowing. The person asking a question, raising a concern, isn't thinking of themselves as maybe they could be a whistleblower. They're not. So in this first attempt, 7% raises concern to the wrongdoer. So you see a colleague do something that you say, hey, is this okay? Do you think this is okay? Or maybe it's a breach of policy, or should we be doing this? Okay. That's how whistleblowing actually starts, and you get a weird reaction, right? And then you might take the next step. But also in the first attempt, so 7% with the wrongdoer, 52% with the line manager. These people are not blowing the whistle. They see a mistake. They say to the line manager, there's a mistake here, or hey, this happens a lot. Why is this always going wrong? It's a simple remark, or it's an awkward question. And you notice it's an awkward question once you've posed it, out of the reaction you get. But that's how whistleblowing starts, and it slowly escalates. And the overall pattern is that whistleblowers, or people who end up as whistleblowers, they tend to search for a more independent person to raise a concern with each time they raise a concern. But it is very much, and for a very long time, an internal process. Even at the 4th attempt, 50% was still raising the concern internally. So I think, when we teach it, we want to capture this protracted process somehow. The second reason why, the bad vignette was a bad vignette is because we know from research that whistleblowers are passionate. and they're passionate about their organization, and they want to keep their organization from being harmed, from doing wrong, from getting a bad reputation. They actually want to do something very good for their organization. And when that seems impossible because the organization doesn't like them raising the concern, then they become very passionate about their profession and about professional values. And if that also doesn't work, then there's other whistleblowers that say, "Hey, you're one of us now. You're one of the whistleblowers," and so then they tend to identify as whistleblowers, and then they become very passionate about society and justice. And I'm sort of exaggerating a bit here, but that's in research I did with Kate Kenny and Mariana Futaki. That's what we saw in how whistleblowers were narrating their stories about how it started, etc. This also resonates with research Rothschild and Mita did in 1999 already. Rothschild and Mita wrote that from their research, people inadvertently became whistleblowers, which means that by the time someone says, "Hey, what you're doing is whistleblowing," they were already in a lot of trouble, and they hadn't realized. And this is something you very often hear from whistleblowers, that they say that they've been naive for such a long time, and they should have known all these things they know now a lot sooner. But I think that's reality, and so the bad vignette doesn't capture that enough. The third reason is, well, very often organizations are terrible in how they respond to someone who's speaking up and raising a concern, even if they mean well. And this is from ongoing research. I'm speaking now. I'm presenting a paper on that at a conference later this year. We were talking to managers, directors, and sort of the sample we had were all people who, in the way we sort of called for people to participate in the research, it was really inviting, so that people who had something good to show wanted to join and participate in the research. So it's actually all our interviewees, we can assume that they actually believed they did well. Okay, they ran a good system. And so we asked them about, how do you run the system? And, is it difficult, and what happens? And a lot of them were just really crap at responding to people who raise a concern. And the frequent mistakes they make, so even if they mean well, the frequent mistakes they made were they were guessing the motive, and they were hooking a lot of decisions on how to follow up on the motive they were guessing. And I mean, who has a single pure motive? Motives are always mixed, right? And even if you're going to guess someone's motive, it's a bad idea. That's a mistake. Second mistake was they assume that a worker who's going to raise a concern is very articulate, can actually present and identify exactly what's going wrong, why that is breaching a certain organizational value, etc. And they assume that level of workers being articulate and also empowered. The reality is, people sort of think something might be wrong, and they're actually, they're a bit scared. They're not full of confidence when they're gonna approach management about that. The third mistake is managers and directors tend to really believe their policies are clear. So if someone is confused, surely, I mean, what is this, right? No, they're much too convinced about the clarity of their policies. And then the fourth assumptions that they make mistakes in is that they seem to work with the system cannot fail. If something goes wrong, it's not because of the system, it's because of the person raising the concern, using the wrong procedure, doing it in the wrong way, etc. And so this is why even people who want to respond very often just mess it up. It's not the whistleblower that's the problem. It's most often the people who need to respond to whistleblowers. And then reason number 4 is that actually most reports are a mixed bag. And I get this from really good Australian research called Whistle While They Work 2 project, and the report is called Clean as a Whistle, published in 2019. And so what they found is, they did research with organizations, is that out of all the reports that come into a whistleblowing channel, around 20% are really and only purely public interest. So these are integrity breaches. Clear, right? Clear cut. And 33%, it says 34 there, but it's 33% is personal grievance. So, okay, as someone with a grudge, not a happy worker, and doesn't like other people don't like them, personal grievance. Pure, nicely. But 47% is a bit of both. And so we actually have to, when you operate a whistleblowing channel, you need to assume that the mixed reports is the normal. Okay, it's not that, oh, there's a lot of noise. No, this is the normal. That's what you're going to get in, and you need to be really good at untangling those, because the mixed reports tend to involve more wrongdoers. Mixed reports, the wrongdoers are more likely to be managers. And so you see that it's these mixed reports that currently are more likely to be treated unsuccessfully. And that's because at the initial stage, the triage stage, they get thrown into the personal grievances. So they go to HR, and HR treats it as a grievance, and they forget the integrity dimension to it. So I think, all these 4 reasons that we know from research, you want to capture that in the vignette when you're going to teach whistleblowing. So perhaps, a better way to teach whistleblowing to business students would be to use a vignette that says, that has this protracted process. And the one I use is that someone is raising a concern with their line manager. It's someone who checks safety, some safety variables, and finds that, no, operation is unsafe, and he's supposed to report this to the manager, does that, manager overrules him. The next day, the same thing happens, but it's really unsafe. So this person is saying, what should I do? And so he calls an advice line. He calls Transparency International, or he calls Whistleblowing International Network to say, well, what should I do? And they say, well, maybe you want to go to a regulator. This would be the right regulator. And then eventually he calls the regulator. So I put this case before class, and we say, when does whistleblowing start? At what point would you call it whistleblower? How does a person realize it? So we try to see the different stages of a lived experience that people might go through. They might not be so sure at the beginning, but when do they actually become sure of what they've seen, etc. Another vignette is you want a vignette to really capture early stage worries. And there's a lack of evidence. Those are the best vignettes, right? There's a lack of evidence. In the vignette, make sure it's mixed. There's integrity, but it's also a personal grievance or a personal issue. And the worker has a vulnerability. Let me give you an example, and the example is credit to Ashley Savage. The example is, it's a young administrative worker in a construction company, and he suspects his manager is a bit dodgy. And one day he's in the parking lot, and he sees his manager in a car, and there's someone else there, and a brown envelope is passed from one person to another. So he thinks, oh my God, this is a bribe here. But that's all he's got. He's seen something, right? It might be something totally, so he has no evidence. He just has a suspicion. He talks to colleagues, and there's one person in the office that's, let's go to the regulator. But that person has a grudge against the manager because they think the manager is having an affair. So it's not anything about, being bribed. So what would be the best approach? To go alone, to go with the person who's going to complain about the affair? What's the thing? The lack of evidence? Do you need to search for more evidence, etc.? I think that's a much more that's a case that's much closer to reality of the kind of dilemmas and problems that people are going to face. Also, the worker has a vulnerability. This person, sometimes he comes in late to the office. So if the manager wants to retaliate, it's easy, right? You're fired because you're late. So I think, these are much more, they bring it more to life, and it will be the realities that your business students might find themselves in. But actually, when you do that, you can use that vignette. And here's Ashley Savage getting credit on the slide. He's a great scholar. He's now does in consultancy, and I worked with him for Council of Europe workshops where we delivered this kind of training. You use a vignette like that, and you immediately divide the class into three groups. And one group is going to think about this from the perspectives of this worker. What would be the right approach? Another group is going to think about this case from the perspective of the organization who needs to give advice to a whistleblower. And they might want to look at the legislation or whatever, but they're going to give advice. What questions are they going to ask? What would be their advice? And then the third group takes the perspectives of the regulator, in this case, the anti-corruption body. What would they expect? What are they able to do with this? Can they protect this person or not? And so you'll get a situation that's quite contextual, has different perspectives, and is going to be much more closer to reality. Because I think the aim, what you want to get across when you teach the issue of whistleblowing, is that this phenomenon, whistleblowing, is not only the whistleblower who raises a concern. The phenomenon is also created by those who need to respond, but maybe they're ignoring, or they're responding the wrong way, or they're jumping to conclusions. And this phenomenon, whistleblowing, is only obvious and clear with hindsight. So you actually want to get what is the lived experience of how this evolves and all of a sudden totally escalates. I think the learning aim is people are going to be, if you train people to become leaders and managers, is when people are going to voice a concern or disclose wrongdoing, don't expect perfect. Learn to listen for signs, because people might be very scared to actually voice something. Learn to listen for signs, for the abnormal, and say that there might be something here. Let's look a bit deeper. And also, how will others receive me when I want to raise a concern? I think, if you have a very luxurious position and you can spend more than one session on whistleblowing, then I think in a second session, it can be useful to actually invite a whistleblower to then speak to your students about their experience. But one thing here, when we invite successful business people to our class, most often, they come for free. They love it, talking to students. But I would say if you invite a whistleblower, someone who suffered, to talk about their experience, you need to pay them for their time. I think that's a very important consideration I wanted to put across here. I'm going to end with that, Anindo, and hand back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wim, I guess, for putting across the example of a bad vignette and what are the things that we should not do while teaching whistleblowing. And I would say that one of the outcomes of one of our sessions was that one of the speakers shared about prisoner inmates and how he studied certain different kinds of corporate prisoners. I think that is, but after hearing you, I think it could be better if we actually bring whistleblowers also to the class and to share their lived experiences. Thank you so much. And now I would move on to Sylvia, who is going to speak on employee voice, and which is not whistleblowing, which is just about how employees can at least voice and express their knowledge and their ideas. So over to you, Sylvia.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, you are right, Anino. This is probably a topic where we both are very passionate about it. And when we met in March in Madrid, where we thought, well, let's do a session on it. And I do believe that this is actually quite important for business students to understand. So in order to get started, let me just share my screen so that we have the common grounds here. So I think everyone can see this now.
Yes.
So yeah, so in order to think about this a little bit in more depth here, employee voice for creating a responsible organization. So I would like to give first a little bit of background to employee voice, what research says about it. And then moving on by capturing this in management and education, how can we get this across the complexities of employee voice in our classrooms? And I try to bring examples here that are not necessarily tied to just undergraduate classes, but I do it the same in a similar way for my master students or postgraduate students as well. So we are going to talk about employee voice as a way that organizations facilitate certain ways to give employees at any level inside the organization, here's opportunity to participate and to get involved. So this is often understood as, well, let's talk about their workplace. They can have a say about this. But well, we have seen this going also at different levels. So strategic aspects of the business, how can employees get involved in this, can be sometimes pushed by law. But yeah, so it is something where they are passionate about or where they think they can contribute. And this can, of course, happen in a more formal or informal ways, depending on the organizational settings and the venues that organizations decide here to pursue. So if you think about this, employee voice is actually not a new topic. It's an old industrial relations topic, has been discussed under industrial democracy here, given the fact that, well, employees spend quite a time at their workplaces, so they should have some time or some ways of input. Has been picked up by the European Union. So we have, for instance, the European Works Council Directive 1994 that was then implemented in the national settings here. But this is a collective way to have a say and to get involved here. And the European Union also funds projects in this respect that are investigating about employee involvement, either in a collective way or individual ways. So this is then often about, yeah, worker rights, social dialogue at different levels with trade unions, for instance, here. So this is one aspect, but it's also important here that from a business point of view, and we are talking to business students here, that well, they are much closer to the problems itself. So they know processes, they are in interaction with other stakeholders. So they see problems that they can communicate, that managers do not necessarily see here, or senior managers, when we talk about the involvement of middle managers, for instance. And this can therefore, this leads to change, or at least they can make some suggestions here. This can drive innovation and creativity at any level. So I have said, we have seen this even in countries, so our own research shows, even in countries where we have not such an educated workforce, where when we went to Morocco, for instance, they were talking to us and saying, well, middle managers, their voice is actually not needed. These are soldiers. They are arm's length soldiers of the senior managers. Their involvement is not so important, but we show it. Actually, they can, even they have different level of education than probably in developed economies, but this drives innovation and creative behavior. So, but we have, so this was the current stream in the literature, and practitioners talk about this. However, voice has been revived to a certain extent. We have it now again back in the discussion simply because workplaces become more complex here, and students need to understand or here that, well, if they involve employees, if employees get involved, they are more likely to accept consequences that arrive from certain management actions. So bonus not paid. So get them involved here to a certain extent, or when decisions are made about recruitment and selection here. So they would like probably to have a say about this and get involved into processes here. And with sustainability, voice becomes also now more important here. Ibema, in his research, he has shown that if you want to implement certain practices that go hand in hand with sustainability, they are better implemented, their implementation is more effective, and sustainable voice is also used or can be useful in order to push for gender equality. It leads to more integrative workplaces. It's a decent work, comes back to the industrial relations place argument, and then, well, it can spill over, can have spillover effects. So the way we behave at work, or the opportunities given at work, and then we take them, we might do this later outside at work as well. We go to vote. Here we try to get involved in institutions that are given by opportunities that are given by institutions that affect society, our local environment, our local neighborhood here. No? So therefore, it is important to get this probably across, but, well, would we voice? When do students get involved? So this is a little bit more complex, and students need to see this. So there are different channels. It depends also on the content here. Is it about improvement, or is it just about probative voice? So I see something that can be improved, but I'm not going to make a decision or a suggestion on how to take this further. But I would like to have it removed in order so that the team or I myself get more motivated. What is the leverage? What rights do I get? Is it just, is it a right to get some information, to understand something better? Am I consulted? Can I engage in a dialogue or even engage in or participative decision making? So this is also, organizations will decide on this here. And then what are the experiences and expectations? Voice is a process, so it's not a one-off. So employees will watch what happens to their voice and then make a decision on this. The context, therefore, is therefore important. And Wim, I'm with you, what you said before, silence here. So it's a kind of voice, needs to be interpreted here. It's a flip side of it here. So how do we deal with this here? Yeah, so how can we capture this? Simply because, well, at least in my curriculum, and if you take the mainstream HRM textbooks, it is not a core topic. We talk about training development, reward, here job analysis, but voice is not there. But it is actually a practice relevant on different HRM areas. Simply because, well, let's get people involved, they will better understand and they accept consequences. So we need to think about how can we get use the common areas in order to show them that, well, voice is probably a way forward here. Should it be confined just to HRM models, or can we include this also in other aspects or subjects within the same program here? When I was at Warwick Business School and teaching there, we had actually a management issue course that was given to all students within the business school, regardless of whether they were taking management, accounting, whatever it was, and they had to take it. And we had something about employee voice and employee involvement here as well. And, well, my argument is also students will copy. They will see what happens at the university, so their student experience will determine also of how receptive they are when we put arguments forward for voice, or how to execute voice in a good way when they reflect on their own experiences. So therefore, this question is, what can the university do and what can we do within our classes here, where we have probably a little bit more of room and leverage to do it ourselves as instructors. So, well, first of all, and I probably don't need to talk much about this. We have case studies at our hand. So I take a very classical as a bestseller on Harvard Business Review. Here's the pink towels. It's an international business case, but I use it for my HR and organizational behavior classes at whatever level because it's easy to understand. So what do you think when you see pink towels? Or something related to household items. This is something for women now. So what do you think if your organization on Women's Day gives the pink towels to women? So the organization did it. It's a real case. So I can give later the solution to students of what the organization did. So and how they actuated, put this in action. So this is nice to see that these are real cases. But it's also students can identify with it. So empathy is there. So you have female students in class and you have male students in class. And I'd ask them, so if you now were management, how would you act to this? And they see the case provides certain responses by employees and different employee groups. So this is interesting to see. Some employees are silent. So so we can then delve into cross-cultural communication because this case happens in China, and we have a UK company that's located in China, but the workforce are UK people as well and highly educated people, as well as the Chinese local workers that have more support functions. So we have power issues coming in as well here. So we can therefore decide on, well, how should management react? Can this be resolved by involving employees? Here, and then the issues evolve often then, well, give employees a voice to say what can be done next year at Women's Day when they want to give out, or how this should be celebrated. Is this a problem? Should we there have a forum? And how do we manage then this forum? So therefore, these are easy cases that can be discussed, and usually students like this. Here you get great discussions on this. The other way, bring it back to them. This is particularly works well at higher postgraduate level here. How to work with a workaholic. Here, so you have here different sides coming, an employee workaholic manager side here. So who gets involved in this? So can you get involved the workaholic to create awareness about the situation? Should you go with your supervisor or with HR here? What is your intention? Do you would like to just to make sure that you get the reward because you might be shown in a bad light or bad performance when you are compared to a workaholic? Are you really concerned about the workaholic? What expectations are created from a manager's side, among employees, from the workaholic? And when is it probably better to stay silent? And what are the consequences of this, either for managers or for those the other stakeholders involved? So this works well. But these are cases that we develop in class, and certainly all of us are doing this. But what we can also do is to think a little bit about what is about involvement and voices at university level. So what CUNEF does, we have student representatives elected by students here, and they are, throughout the semester, they are asked or invited for a round and at university level as well as group level. So subject level as 1 year or second year here, and then they talk about their teaching. What are their experiences in class here? Then we have about 170 international students coming in every semester, and we are a private institution here. CUNEF University is a private institution. We have an intake of 600 undergrad students per year here. So 175 international students and 600 local students. We make some buddies. So these are the ones that integrate and guide students throughout the semester here, and they feel proud of it here. In student initiative driven initiatives by students, and they come up with it. So we have now, for instance, a sustainability club simply because students wanted to do this. here. And we give them opportunities to showcase the actions and experiences here through their involvement. So, for instance, Anindo, you could remember I had the round table with the students, no? So they could talk about their what they have done, what they have learned. So this is also kind of an involvement. This creates, they can see that they can talk. And this gives them some confidence. We have students that work as ambassadors, PRIME ambassadors, and we have now one student actually who had applied to become a regional lead on PRIME here. So this is what we do in class. What I do, I don't have space. I don't have PowerPoints any longer, so I give them out space, and it's autonomous learning, and then we do work in class, but they can shape these activities to a certain extent. I give them, if it's on assignments, they can choose the topic, they can choose the empirical setting, and probably also the timing. I do this not towards the end, I do this throughout the semester. Here, and they give them, leave it open. You can choose how you would like to present your results, whatever is best here, so they can shape therefore their learning and the presentation of their learning in different ways. I tell them as well, syllabus is not put in stone, bring something to class. Here, if you think that is relevant, if you see something at work, here you have read something, and I think it's relevant, then we can discuss it in class. Yeah, I do team building activities because students need to learn, if I do project activities, on how this can work. You cannot just tell them, even if it's a fourth year students, a final year students, now you work in teams. No, you need to build them up here and give them, yeah, and then they can use the opportunities in order to collaborate probably in class. We have often time constraints or certain challenges, time constraints, participation, these opportunities are less taken when it comes towards the end. I have sometimes problems with the lecture room designs here, getting them all in. We have the typical students who always participate. Sometimes students also don't see. I'm the boss, I'm coming from a university, I will not join an organization at the bottom line. What I say is the going rate. So they have sometimes naive understandings, they have sometimes understandings of where they don't quite understand that it is not about, they do not necessarily only need to think about their situation, but voice can also, this is an interplay here. So it's not only one person, but about the team probably. And yeah, I would like to do more about listening. Listening is something that students also need to learn. And it's often sometimes difficult to integrate. Here, I do some listening in the sense that I often, when I do role plays, when I do negotiation activities, I have student observers that then later report in class. So who got involved and why here, and then yeah, so then there's some type of listening here as well. So this is what talking a little bit about how I try to get my research in terms of employee voice across into class so that students understand the importance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvia. If there are any questions by anyone, they can put it on the Q&A box. But since I have not received any, so it means that you all have been absolutely clear about whatever you have said. But I am quite inquisitive about things. I would have some questions which I would ask each one of you. So first, I would like to start with Anthony. Anthony, thank you so much for your presentation and really setting the tone and context. My question to you is, many a times when we talk about sustainability, we always emphasize the importance of taking a systems perspective. I think taking a systems perspective, respecting the interconnectedness that exists within a system is one of the primary assumptions that we make whenever we start any dialogue on sustainability. On the contrary, what you are saying is that sometimes the system also needs to be questioned. But how would you address this connection? Because many a times we actually learn to behave according to the system. And then how do you think, because from a psychological perspective, if you say, how can we break this, if I would say, bad habits and get into a different way of doing things and actually question that yes, something is wrong in the system and it actually needs to change, even if what we say could be not in terms of the notions of efficiency and effectiveness sometimes.
Yeah, I think it would have to be structural. That's for sure. We can't really depend on people's psychology. I mean, if you look at all the social psychological research over the last 80 years, it all suggests that, people will get into in-groups and out-groups and they'll very happily do whatever the group wants them to do because it feeds into their self-esteem. I think the only interesting clue we have is in high reliability organizations. So in high reliability organizations where there's high probabilities that if something goes wrong, it'll be fatal, they start from the perspective that a failure is likely to happen. And I think that's a way to begin it, basically. We have to assume that something's going to break down or something's going to happen. And so we have to start from the perspective that what do we do if something does break down? So we have to be ready for that. But I think we need, I was talking about the Hillsborough Law. I mean, there's no other way around it. We have to legislate for it. We have to have policies and procedures which protect people. And we can't depend on individuals. We definitely can't depend on leaders who are always going to protect the organizations ultimately. I mean, an individual not protecting the organization, that's going to be an exception. That's going to be an outlier. Most people will always do what the organization needs them to do. So we have to start from there. We have to start from the perspective that how can we engineer it so that we can protect society, protect the public against organizations who are, fundamentally set up to make profits.
That's a very good point. And so you emphasize the importance of policies and procedures. And I would like to come to Wim right now, because I know for sure that you have been part of many policymaking bodies on whistleblowing in the past and also in the present, and quite a few of them are international bodies. So what are the challenges that you very commonly face when you are in a policy dialogue on whistleblowing? You know for sure, because you are a strong, passionate researcher in whistleblowing. But what are the challenges that you face when you talk with policymakers? And I'm talking about policymakers because they're also part of the stakeholder voice, and you also have to talk about the voices that you have heard from various different stakeholders. How do you kind of maneuver this challenge?
Well, I mean, with policymakers, they make policies on a lot of different things. So, they're at a disadvantage because they don't have the time to look into a particular issue as much as you can as a scholar. So I think, the biggest challenge and also the biggest frustration is that every time you start with having to break down the myths around whistleblowing. And I think that's, as soon as you start talking about, compensation for harm, they react and say, "Oh, we're gonna reward." Well, a reward is something different than a compensation. So, I mean, by now you sort of know what the sensitivities are, what the myths are around, focusing on motive. I think that's the sort of standard thing. But I think what I've noticed is that the people you talk to, they're like, it's like a bell curve. On the one hand, if I talk to people who run or manage in organizations, there's this small minority, and oh my God, they're amazing organizations. What a culture, you have great leaders. Then on the other tail, it's also a small minority, but they're just horrible. and whatever legislation structure, you know, it's gonna be a crap organization, so run. But I think, you know, the biggest majority is in the middle, well-meaning, but they think goodwill alone is actually gonna allow them to actually do it in the right way. And so, yeah, I think for a lot of times when it's about, you know, not covering up something that goes wrong, or it's about, you know, listening to very soft, maybe, or you know, generating a group mentality and letting employee voice work. I think your goodwill alone isn't going to get you there. You actually need the skills, and so I think, you know, it's a sort of accepting that. With regard to whistleblowing, I think one of the biggest challenges I now face is I think, you know, compliance people, they tend to get it really, but they are fighting now their boards. The people on their boards of directors still think like, oh, why do we put money into this? So I think it's helping others now to face the challenges. That's a challenge. Yeah.
Another interesting point, I think, coming to Anthony once again quickly, but one of the things that you talked about was many of the psychologists have a tendency towards getting into business schools nowadays, and I mean, kind of delving into more business issues. What is the skepticism that you have about it? And because if you talk about employee voice is a phenomena which will require both psychologists and management scientists alike to investigate that issue. But how do you think? What is your idea about conducting a more responsible research on employee voice, where in a team where perhaps both psychologists and business researchers are involved?
So is this question for Sylvia or me?
No,
So,
it's for you, Anthony.
yeah, well, I think that's a good question. Yeah, I do a lot of research about employee silence and employee voice in healthcare. And one of the biggest problems, the biggest challenge is that in healthcare, people learn what they can voice about and what they can't voice about. So if you do kind of a survey, or if you even do qualitative stuff, on the surface, it looks like, they're experiencing employee voice. But actually, if you go a bit more in depth, you realize that they've just learned what they can't voice about. So, and I think this is highly problematic. And on the other hand, you have this kind of, in healthcare and social care, we have increasing, the formalization of care has increased exponentially. You know, people have tablets, people write reports, we've checklists. And what this tends to do is that this drives informal communication then happens kind of, you know, outside. It's seen as something that happens outside, sort of in the corridors. So people communicate the really important stuff informally, and then they're very careful about what they communicate formally. So we have this interesting paradox that in medicine, to make it safer, they've introduced procedures to increase the level of transparency and formal reporting. But all that is done is it's reminded people that actually they have to be very careful about what they say formally, and the real conversations happen informally then, which means that they're not opportunities for learning or opportunities for finding out. I mean, psychological safety is something which is quite interesting. So this is a very popular concept, but of course, there's emerging evidence that it can be bad, that there's lots of instances, especially in healthcare, where increased levels of psychological safety lead to worse outcomes. And I don't think we're talking enough about that, for example. And the reason it does is because it works very well when you're talking about creativity, and it works very well when you're talking about innovation. But when you're talking about things like in-role behavior, it actually ends up increasing risky behaviors in healthcare settings.
Right. I think, and now I will come to Sylvia, and firstly, I would say that it was really insightful, your example on using pink towel case study. And but I would like to ask you that have you ever in your classroom come across experiences where students have actually gone forward towards asking about whistleblowing, because your research is mostly around employee voice and whatever you're talking about, because most of the time in a classroom setting and in business schools, we mostly talk about employee voice. Whistleblowing is not an easy subject to trade into. It requires a certain degree of expertise. I hope Wim will accept to that, but whistleblowing is not an easy topic to get into. But then there are students who would be more expressive. And I really like the idea about students, when they are doing something good, they are being given an opportunity. As I saw when I visited CUNEF, they got an opportunity to come and speak up and share their experiences. And I think that, do you think these kinds of exercises or these kinds of interventions can actually help in help students shedding their inhibitions and becoming more expressive?
Yeah. They wouldn't phrase it as whistleblowing, probably because they are not aware of this term here. But they would report on certain aspects there where they think that there should be a change here. They put this forward. If they come to me, I would often then probably say, what can you do about this before I take the lead here? So making them reflect about this issue even further and guide them then on the ways that the institution would probably provide here. As a private institution, we have quite a number of ways in order to deal with these kind of situations and different channels. So I would, in terms of classes, I don't have, and I don't teach, I haven't taught a whistleblowing case here. I would, no, this is not something that we would bring it to as a topic in human resource management, organizational behavior forward.
But you raised one point very, very well, that it is always a question of whether you're speaking for improvement or you're speaking for criticism. And many a times, I think one of the things that students have is they are quite sensitive these days about any kind of criticism that they receive. And I think that's kind of the precursor. If you kind of nurture that kind of a behavior and you're always concerned that, no, we should not criticize someone. Sometimes criticism is okay. I mean, people should be willing to take criticism with an open mind. And it's, I mean, if they cannot, I think that also do you think that that also could be a reason that later on these same people could actually create cultures where they do not appreciate anyone voicing?
Yes, so but we as instructors can already set the tone from the very beginning, I believe, on how to voice criticism, and we have all the online tools available. So we have student communication tools, and I use them actively in class from the very beginning so that students criticize the work by others. It helps me to see, well, a student in 15 minutes can produce X and I can produce this. What can I, so they see, and it makes it easier for me later to justify grades, but they can also learn on or see what makes a good work
Right.
here. And I often take the lead at the very beginning. I ask them, is there someone who would like to have their work reviewed? And they see how I give constructive criticism. But I need to strongly monitor this here. So I step in if I see that there is something written that should not be there. But we have relatively small classes. I cannot do this with 150 students, but I can do this with 40 students that I have in class, and I can monitor the communication here that is done over the student communication tools, and I do this strictly. I mean, I step in and I give feedback. And I give feedback not only on the content, but I can also give feedback on the way it was communicated here. I often also make sure that students know what is said in the classroom stays in the classroom.
Absolutely, yes. Anthony or Wim, you would like to respond to that question as well, if you want to? I mean, how do we create a culture where students are more open to criticism and at the same time instill attitude of voicing and not having any kind of reservations per se? I mean, Wim,
Yeah, I think, you know, a brief comment. It's something I've been teaching business ethics classes, and it's something I've been doing that for more than 20 years, and it's something that really struck me is that students really want to discuss things. So it is really a question about making sure there's not someone or a small group of people sort of monopolizing the discussion. I think that's really key in there. You know, I'm hesitating a bit because I don't have such sophistic means as Sylvia has. That's quite impressive how it's structured. We use something that is useful is a Cairo tool where you know you can, I mean, we can brainstorm a little bit. You put it into Cairo that, you know, you have different statements, and then students maybe in groups of 2 or 3, they can actually formulate different pros and cons and further thoughts to each of these. And you can't see who's posting what. At least students can't see it from each other. I could. So, you know, if someone would post something which is too aggressive or unacceptable, I could actually filter that out. But I think that's a useful way for also students who might not dare to say something they're not sure about, even whether they actually take this position or not. So, you know, some people who really hesitate, that's been a useful way to get a lot of information stuff.
Why I've asked this question is because sometimes we also have different perceptions about pro-social behavior, or what Anthony was just now talking about, something which is in favor of certain kinds of professions. So you hesitate to bring something in a formal communication, and you resort to more informal communication. And what could happen is many a times the errors could not be detected and will not be reported in time, and could have costly consequences, not just for the organization, but also for the individuals involved. Anthony, any concluding remarks that you would like to have now?
Yeah, no, just I really like the discussion there about, you know, criticism and how you can get people to talk up. And I guess we have this interesting paradox in society where, on the one hand, we're constantly told, you know, we should be speaking up more, we should talk, we should be allowed to share things. But on the other hand, we're also told we have to be very careful about what we say so we don't offend people. Now, I think both things are right. You know, we should be careful about what we say, about what we offend people. But what's happened, I guess, is that that's gone to such an extreme that it's made people incredibly guarded about what they say. And so I think people are more conscious, especially because of social media and even what they write. So we're very much more conscious about the information we put out there, either, you know, in a classroom or in a kind of online. And this, I think, is contradictory to the idea of the voice. So there's a contradiction there, which we can't really resolve very well. But I think it ultimately makes people more guarded about what they say. People spend a lot of time figuring out what they should say, what they're allowed to say, what's permissible to say, rather than engaging in authentic discussion about what they want to say, you know, which is, again, it goes back. I think that the discussion we're having about voice and criticism link very much with this psychological safety idea, this idea that you can, you know, the whole idea of psychological safety is you can speak with candor, with groups, you know, about particular issues, and you feel happy that you can share this information. But I don't think in reality anybody does, you know, because you always have to be careful what you say, and even more so now. And, you know, it's right to be careful about what you say, but then the question is, to what degree does this get people's mind consciously working on figuring out what to say rather than the content of what they say. So it's, you know, they're getting focused on, am I allowed to say this, rather than there's something I need to say. Yeah.
Sylvia, you have some concluding remarks? You're mute.
Yeah, so just Anthony raised an important point here. So making people to speak up or to understand when it's better not to speak up and accept the consequences of this is very much cultural bound as well. So I've done research in Mexico, and they use voice in a different way, and they use WhatsApp in order to voice something. So WhatsApp in Spain or in Germany, you would not talk about WhatsApp. I mean, I would not have of my colleagues all WhatsApp, and certainly not. So this is certain channels, and they treat it in a different way. And sometimes it's interesting to see these dynamics in classrooms where you have quite a number of international students who might be more talkative or less talkative than your local students. And this creates also interesting dynamic that needs to be managed here. And probably we have our own tools then on how to deal with this situation, but they can learn from each other. They are still young, and they observe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Quick concluding remarks from you, Wim, if you have.
No, only to thank you, and I'm sure that, you know, also on behalf of Anthony and Sylvia, thank you for inviting us, putting us together. I think it's you've made it match wonderfully well. At least that's my feeling. I see Anthony and Sylvia not. So thank you, Aninda.
Thank you so much for giving us time and for joining this session and for this really insightful for making this session really very insightful. We would now conclude this session, and we would be meeting in the main lobby. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the audience who have been with us, everyone throughout. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can always write us. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.